Welcome to the Biotech Startups podcast by Exceeder. Join us as we speak with first-time founders, serial entrepreneurs, and experienced investors about the challenges and triumphs of running a biotech startup, from pre-seed to IPO, with your host, John Chi. In our last episode, we talked with Oguzhan about his upbringing in Turkey, his journey to Princeton, and the interdisciplinary approach to science that shaped his perspective. He also shared how his early experiences instilled in him resilience and a passion for education, laying the foundation for his future in molecular diagnostics. If you missed it, be sure to go back and listen to part 1. In part 2, Oguzhan reflects on his transition to Stanford, where his groundbreaking Ph.D. research and interdisciplinary focus helped shape the innovative approaches that would go on to define BillionToOne. We'll also hear about his leap from academia to entrepreneurship, the many challenges of building a biotech company, and his mission to make molecular diagnostics more accessible on a global scale.
Can you talk a little bit about the origin of BillionToOne and when did you know it was time to actually do it officially and spread your wings from Stanford?
So I think Y Combinator has played a huge role in making BillionToOne possible. When we were at Stanford, we started thinking about this problem, and we are really trying to solve the biggest problem that we can solve. And for us, it was sickle cell disease and beta thalassemias. World Health Organization recognizes it as one of the most important healthcare problems in the world. We knew that, if we could solve it with cell-free DNA, if we could detect these conditions, in the baby directly from a maternal blood sample, there would be commercial implications of that. We were thinking it, primarily initially for developing countries, because we didn't realize that this was actually a problem in the US, right? US being a very developed, economy, we thought that, okay, in the US, you screen the mother, you screen the father, it's not a big deal. It's not a resource limited environment. But we actually talk with, many physicians in developing countries, including in India, and we really realized that this is a big problem that we can solve. We also approached the problem from a physics math perspective, really trying to understand what is the maximum information that we can extract from cell-free DNA. How can we get to the highest signal noise? If we can get to a single molecule level, sensitivity and precision, what does that look like in terms of actually the sensitivity and specificity of the diagnosis for these conditions in this cell-free DNA setting. So we had essentially, I think, good technical ideas, and we had some market validation that this is an important problem, and we had thought about it deeply. But of course, we didn't have any background in business. Stanford has been very good at, providing a lot of courses that you can take during your PhD, design school, entrepreneurship classes. So I've been, especially in my, 4th and 5th year, I have been taking those, courses. Cool. But it wasn't we still didn't know how to start that flywheel effect, right? What that, first thing that makes it real would be. And it was, there was, we knew about Y Combinator, of course, being at Stanford, you get exposed to those things.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So we applied, and we got invited to an interview, which is already, I think, pretty amazing because, it's a very selective process.
Yeah.
And we went there, and I think, interview went relatively well, except that at the end, they asked us the question of, if we fund you, are you going to drop out from your PhDs? And we're like, well, this is science. Like, we can't just drop out from PhDs. Like, our credentials are important, and no one will take us seriously if we are dropouts. And by the way, I would get kicked out of the country if I
Yeah.
like
This is
this is not a good idea.
yeah,
And,
yeah.
and they were like, well, if you don't drop out, we are not going to fund you. They were like, okay, like, you're a little defeated.
Yeah.
But then they called and they said, look, we have this fellowship program. And they were just like trying out this program at that time. And we are going to give you just $20,000. And we want you to show that this actually works. You're like, you are like, okay, like you can't even get like lab space in
Yeah,
20,000.
yeah, yeah.
Like, how is this going to work? But they were like, just do it. And I think one of the good things that they really force you to do, even though they don't understand, I think, biotech, as deeply, except for one or two people there, they ask you a lot of why questions until you say that, okay, I'm going to try, right? Like, they would be like, I can't do a clinical trial for, $100,000. And they would be like, why? Just collect some pregnant patient blood and, test them. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't work that way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But then they keep asking you why, like, why it doesn't work that way, and
Yeah.
then you're like, well, like, there are all these rules, regulations, IRB, like, and they're like, well, can you do it somewhere else? Can you do it differently? Can you go to another country? And we actually have done a lot of those things. But with $20,000, we have been able to show that the idea has technical legs, that it would likely work. We wouldn't have proven it yet, but like, I think we have shown experimentally that we could do it. And then we have talked with a lot of physicians. We actually had a much better sense of what the company could look like. And then we tried to raise money, and that is when the first hurdle came, because even though Y Combinator's normal program, they create this amazing fear of missing out for investors, that it is very easy to raise. It's almost too easy to raise money as a normal Y Combinator company, but that is not the case for fellowship. For fellowship,
Yeah.
like, they didn't have that help. They didn't help
Yeah.
that as much.
Yeah.
So it was like brutally difficult to raise that first $300,000 that we were trying to raise. It took 6 months, $10,000 checks, a lot of rejections, and it was really, a significant portion of that even came from my friends, who like literally gave me their life savings, which were like $20,000 for each of them. Wasn't big checks, but they really believed in me, even though I kept telling them that there's a 98% chance that a startup fails, because like, I didn't want to like harm my
Yeah.
relationship with them
Yeah.
as well. But they trusted me. They were like, look, we know that there's a 98% chance of an average startup fails, but we don't think that you are average. We don't think that those are the numbers that we need to look at here. And they ended up giving more than $100,000 of that round. And then
Wow.
I could go to investors and say that we almost raised half of the round, and they would think that, oh, investors are giving money to this
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
There must be
Just my
only
friends.
something.
Just my friends.
Yeah, I didn't tell them it was just my friends.
And yeah.
So we were able to raise $300,000, but it was tough. It was tough, and the thing is, like, that was one of the most difficult rounds that we raised. After that, we actually showed that this would work. We started some clinical trials. We started collaborating with Baylor. We did a clinical trial in India, and we were able to get to a much stronger place. We graduated, which meant that you could get into Y
Yeah.
Combinator
Yeah. Yeah.
program.
Yeah.
And then we were able to raise the next round, $2 million. Like, that was actually so easy, except that there is actually a story there about that $2 million raise as well. But from there on, every round actually, became easier and easier. The last round that we raised this year was, challenging because of the macro environment, but we were still able to raise like an oversubscribed round, even, in 2024, which is, I think that, extremely rare for any company to raise like an up round and oversubscribed round during this time. So, but it kind of created our culture as well early on that, because it was so difficult to raise that initial fundraising, that we do not waste funds. Like we are very focused on, doing more with less, being essentially very careful about, capital spending.
That's amazing. And I have the exact same experience. Like when it is your close friends who put their life savings in your company, you're going to watch those dollars like with a crazy level of attention. Is you cannot let them down. And that's the same with mine. Like that first friends and family round, $5,000 checks, $10,000 checks. And like even to get them to want to put those checks in, it was like, first I had to get the equipment myself and show them that the thing works. And then they're like, okay, well, seems like you put everything in. They didn't put everything in there, but they're like, we'll put something in. And like, we'll keep going from there. And I think that level of discipline is like that struggle in the beginning just builds like incredibly good habits when it comes to like operational efficiency and trying to get as much as you can out of every dollar that you've been given. Because I think you talked about like, standard companies go through who may go through the traditional Y Combinator experience. There's just like checks just being dumped on them. You don't really have to build that like muscle. And it really is like a muscle. You have to actually use it. And when you don't have those constraints, you're just like, yeah, screw it. We're going to have the most wild holiday party, like, and just like, and then you're like, oh man, we spent too much money. Whereas like, when your friends and family are just like, no, we are relying on you to make this go the distance, you kind of think differently. But I guess two questions. Throughout this process, how did you meet your co-founder? Was he in your lab at Stanford?
So we started as three co-founders. We all knew each other from Princeton. We all went through that integrated science program.
Oh, wow.
We actually lived together at Princeton in our final year, and we all went to PhDs, and we started brainstorming about this problem, and how we can apply mathematical physical problem principles to solve this problem. So we started as three co-founders. One of them was a very academically oriented person, brilliant scientist, but like he didn't want to do anything with, I think, commercialization. So as soon as the clinical studies were completed, he went back to the academia. And my other co-founder, David, and I, have been at the company together, throughout all of these. And, these days you have gone through so much together that, if you ask me a question and ask him a question, you would almost always get the same answer. Because, when you have so many shared experiences, you develop, very similar ways of looking at problems.
Absolutely. And I love hearing that. I love that it went all the way back to Princeton too. Like and I think when you have a business partner or just a partner in general, where you can get into that rhythm, and I think I always think about like the ability for an organization to move quickly and decisively. It's just all about this trust. Like if you build this culture of trust and relationships and like where everyone just trusts each other and you're not second guessing, that's where like magic happens, because you can make these like decisive decisions that may be very important, because speed is of essence. And when you find that magic with your co-founder or whoever it may be, amazing things happen. So you and your co-founders, get through YC. And I guess as you are kind of like, obviously you have to pitch this. Maybe let's just set the table for the listeners here. what, when you set out to found BillionToOne, what is your guys' like mission and focus? And I guess when you saw the status quo, like the industry out there, how did you guys feel like you were going to disrupt that status quo?
Yeah, so I mean, this is also one of those examples where like you kind of have to not pivot too quickly, but you need to take into the data that you are seeing and take into account to make changes to the plans that you have. So, we knew that sickle cell disease and beta thalassemias were a big problem. You know, we were able to even, get Minister of Health in India to be personally involved in the project
Wow.
to try to help us, right? So we knew that, okay, we are solving an important problem. People want this problem to be solved. And from a technological perspective, we knew that we were on the right track, essentially trying to get down to that single molecule level sensitivity. And the problem was, essentially right now, finding out whether a baby, a fetus, has one of these conditions requires testing the mother, then testing the father, and doing an invasive procedure, taking a sample directly from the fetus, and then testing that sample. And it's kind of a long, difficult process, especially in resource-limited environments, like in developing countries. It just, it's very difficult to complete that. A lot of the times, even if you can test the mother, that pregnant mother might not even be going to the same clinic again. So it's difficult to even, coordinate, getting the father in. And if you can, doing the amnio is difficult. So it's, we know that it's a, really broken, system, but we didn't know that this is broken in the United States as well. So we are thinking that, okay, like this is a big problem in developing countries, very common, very severe genetic conditions. We can start from there and expand into, other conditions and other places. What we ended up seeing was essentially twofold. One, it was very difficult to do clinical studies in India, even with the support of some of the highest ranked healthcare professionals. And the reason was that the infrastructure is not set up for that. They didn't know like what is permissible, what is not permissible, what the approval process should be. And a lot of the things is set up so that something is already approved in Europe or the US and they are bringing it to the country. And for something completely novel to be built from scratch, that wasn't really something that the infrastructure was set up for. So we have been running into so many problems and so much bureaucracy and so much paperwork. And we are trying to do the things the right way, right? Like in India, you could actually just ignore all of those things and actually do them.
Yeah.
But like we don't want to be like, fly by night lab. Like we want to do things the right way, but like people didn't even know what that right way was. Like it's just a very unexplored, path. So we were essentially running into all these issues, even with the support of, all these influential people. And at the same time, we are seeing, we actually, I was listening to an OBGYN speaking on behalf of, one of the competing companies in the field, looking at Down syndromes. And she mentioned something like, I wish this could have been expanded to, single gene conditions, like, sickle cell disease and beta thalassemias. I'm like, that is what we are doing. Like,
Yeah.
and it's a webinar, right? Like, I couldn't even interrupt her. It's like, okay, why did she say that? Why did she make this comment? Why did this OBGYN make this comment? So I kept emailing her, after I think third or fourth attempt, she was like, okay, I'm happy to, talk with you. And I asked, why did you make this comment? Why is this a problem in the United States? And she said that, look, I'm an OBGYN in Beverly Hills. And, one of my patients came back to let me know that, we missed the beta thalassemia case. And this is top of mind for me. And if we missed one case that, came back to me, this is after the baby is born, they don't get born looking beta thalassemia or like cystic fibrosis. There may be many other cases that we may be missing. And This is a problem. If we could detect it with cell-free DNA, it would be, so much more beneficial. And I was like, why is this a problem? And she was like, testing the fathers is actually really difficult. It doesn't always happen. And, if it doesn't happen in Beverly Hills, think about the rest
Yep.
of the country,
Yeah.
right? So that was, I think, a kind of a light bulb moment. Like at that time, really, there wasn't any research that looked at this problem. Like after that, actually, now there is actually a lot of literature around this where it shows that, more than half of the fathers do not get tested. We are missing, at least 60% of affected pregnancies, even though these are very actionable conditions that are so important to detect during pregnancy. So, but at that time, like, there wasn't that research. So like after that, I started speaking with other OBGYNs in the country, spent a lot of time, and we realized that this is actually one of the most broken workflows in the United States healthcare system. Right? We are spending billions of dollars testing the mothers to see whether they are a carrier, but we are not really finding whether the babies are affected. Right? It is just wasted healthcare dollars that are not actionable. So while we are recognizing how difficult it is to even do a clinical study in India, we are finding that, okay, this is a really big problem in the United States as well. And then we were able to get a US clinical study started with a remarkable MD PhD, Dr. Sheehan at Baylor. We centered this, we had three people. So we centered like this little animated video that we had created about what we are doing. And she spent all of her life trying to help babies and toddlers and adolescents deal with sickle cell disease. And she really cared about the problem, and she thought that this would be a really good solution. So it was actually her, not an OBGYN or an MFM, who really helped us, get this started. She spent a lot of time with us with, that initially we got an NIH, grant as well, to help with the study. And that along with the, study in India, became the core of our first publication. And that is how we were able to launch the test essentially, clinically, commercially in the United States. But even then, we actually realized later on as well that if you offer a sickle cell disease and beta thalassemia test in the United States, no one will use it because it is too small of a panel. Like people want to cover at least the ACOG recommended, conditions. So we're like, okay, we need to build, now a test for ACOG recommended genes, which is, there are 5 of them. So we then had to kind of a little bit pivot and, build and validate, all those 5, before we could launch it. But kind of that tells you the story of like, it wasn't a hard pivot at any one point. It was kind of a similar problem that we were solving, but you had to pivot it based on the data that you were getting. And I think that is something that we see over and over again. In the company, we are very data driven, but not data driven in the sense that like, data is showing this way, let's completely change our direction. It is a lot of like experimental approaches as well. Okay, data is indicating that this other approach might be better. Let's do some small experiments there. Let's see, what's happening there. And then if it works, let's do some, bigger bets. And then if that works, okay, now we can, spend a lot of our resources on this area. And one book actually, I think we developed a lot of these principles, almost independently, but one book that actually really speak to a lot of the things that we do at BillionToOne is Jim Collins' book, Great by Choice. I love that book because, we use the terminology from that book all the time. The idea of 20-mile march. Regardless of external conditions, you have to keep growing at a steady pace. You need to figure out, how to do that. The idea of, bullets than cannonballs. Like, don't bet the company on, one bet. try small experimental bullets before you kind of put large bets into different areas. Um, the a lot of the way that we approach problems here are really, I think, explained really, really well at that book. And so it was kind of a really cool discovery for us. Like when I read that book, I'm like, oh, this is all the things that like we
Yeah.
are trying to do here. And our leadership team is actually like required to read that book because like we use a lot of those principles every day when we are making decisions.
Spot on. And we're the same way at Exceeder too. And I think the one of the it's not, you know, it's a different practice, but early days we had to like when it was just me doing Exceeder, I had to like yes, I was doing your standard sales stuff. I was like doing door-to-door sales. I was like cold calling, doing all that, but I was like, this is not going to scale. Like there's only one of me. I can't, then there's only so many waking hours in the day. And so I had to learn how to do basically Google AdWords, basically paid advertising on my own. But exactly the bullets than cannonballs. You're not going to just like dump your whole budget into like this one ad campaign. Like you have to just like start out with like test budgets, just like toggle the variables and then like to see what comes back. And then when it starts, like you like, oh, these conversion rates are like fantastic. These ones, not so much. This one's just like a money furnace. We're going to turn this one off. And then you start backing up the truck and then you start putting more time, more resource. And, I think, exactly what you said, like you don't want to just like bet the farm like immediately. You kind of want to like dip your toes. What's the saying? Like a crawl, walk, run motion. Like it's far safer. Like it's far safer. And so, I guess a question I have for you is that it's kind of like a baptism of fire, honestly. And I'm going to imagine as you were starting to get this momentum and get this traction, you had to scale up physical operations. Like, can you talk a little bit about, because I know in the early days, you didn't have like the state of the art lab. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of each phase of like building this actual physical infrastructure?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when we first started out, it wasn't even a bench space. We were so conservative with respect to use of cash that we essentially were using the BioCurious space, which is like $150 membership, and it is not. I think it is like just enough for like BSL-1 work. So it's nowhere like Stanford labs or any other labs. It was kind of like, okay, let's get a few experiments done here because that's the only place that we can actually ship chemicals. Like we can't ship it home.
Yeah.
And use sequencing as a service to get something sequenced. Then upload it to AWS because you don't have any of the infrastructure. Analyze the data. And once we had the $300,000 raise, we were like, okay, now we are ready to really graduate, and we got a half a bench at Stanford, StarTex, not one bench, half a bench, because
Half a bench.
again, being very conservative. Right?
Yeah.
At like half a bench, $1,200 per month, rent for half a bench. We didn't even have office space. We were hanging out in the kind of break room between the experiments.
Yeah.
We then, raised our, $2 million, seed. And then, we started really scaling up. We went from, half a bench to one full bench. Two benches, at Shoutouts. We had two benches. We felt that, we had so much space, having two benches. At StarTex, and essentially that also I think changed and defined our culture of hiring. A lot of the times, when you can raise funds easily, I think you end up hiring a lot of people before you potentially need them. Like you feel like, oh, I'm the CEO, and I'm like, no, like I'm going to do every imaginable thing that that is possible not to hire people. I mean, I think like we hired our, first CFO, and it was the first, finance person in the entire company, like when we were 100 employees. First HR, 100 employees. I onboarded like the first 100 people myself. We didn't hire HR like until 100 employees. Like you are not going to hire unless it is like an absolute need. So, when we were getting to a place, we have 2 million in bank, but we don't want to use it. So we really only hired our first scientist because there were too many experiments, critical experiments that we needed to run. And it was just impossible, for David and me to run all of them. So we hired our first employee then, and really we started hiring more after Series A. Once we had $15 million in the bank, and that really defined the culture in two ways. One is we actually set our cultural values very early on, and we said that we want to build a culture where essentially even if we fail, that the people who joined us would have said that I'm glad that I joined the company. And that is a very high bar to set. That is like an almost impossibly high bar to set, that even though, essentially it's kind of like a dead, 2-3 years in your resume, and that like you can go back and say that I am glad that I joined the company. And that is only possible, if you are only hiring truly stellar, brilliant people, you are working on important problems, and you have agency to work on those problems, and that you feel that you are making a difference. Like, and even if it fails, you can go back and say that I learned a lot. I work with other brilliant people. We try to solve a really hard, important problem. And sure, like it failed, but like I wouldn't have changed the experience for anything else. Like that was the bar that we set, that that is how we wanted to build the company. And we set our cultural values even before we hired our first employee. Like we were like, these are the cultural values that we have. This is what it means. That also meant that like we wouldn't ever overhire. So throughout all of these things, we went from at the beginning of pandemic to 20 people, 30 people. At the beginning of pandemic to 500 employees now, full-time employees. And throughout that period, we have never did reductions in forces, layoffs, anything of that sort. It was all 20-mile march, consistent growth, all of that, throughout all of that period. And I think, that sounds all great until you realize that like we, there is a trade-off there, that, we give people really large projects. There is like a lot of ownership, but that also means that everyone and every team feels that there is always too much to do, that there are not enough people. And I'm like, that is by design. Like that is kind of like what the company's culture is. Like that allows you to have those large projects, that allows people to make a large impact. If we had too many people, people would work on unimportant things, right? So I think that set a very high bar for hiring as well. So I mean, we are these days very fortunate that we have like less than 1% acceptance rate, I believe. We are able to attract such amazing talented people, but we also try to make it very clear to them that expectations are high here, that this is not an easy environment, but it is also a very much you can make such a large impact type of environment where if someone comes in, it can be the fastest that they learn and fastest that they grow their throughout their careers is going to be here.
That's amazing. And it's so crazy just like listening to you kind of like describe the culture and your philosophy on company building and hiring, because I feel the exact same way. I always think about hiring, like I only make the hire when I feel the pinch. Like once you feel the pinch and they're like, okay, there is like, this is starting to get painful a little bit, I do need more hands. And it's kind of like, it's not like talking about it just like slow and steady it doesn't sound, it's like, it doesn't sound glamorous. It's like, we're like, sometimes I remember during the kind of go-go of like 2020, 2021, people are just like, the head count was almost like a badge of pride. Like over hiring was almost like a badge of pride. And then boom, everything kind of went crazy. And then you go through this like gnarly contraction where there's just like a lot of pain that kind of like came with that kind of like not feeling the pinch, but just like hiring before there was a job to be done or pain to be solved. And I do this exactly what you described about onboarding the first set of employees. Like when I do screener calls, like I still do the screening calls. And people are always like, what the heck? like John, the CEO, like, yeah, that's me. like, and it's because like we're very, very like we know that we have to be so deliberate in these hires because every single person that joins affects like the next hire and the next hire and the culture. And it's almost like there's like a virality to it. And it can go both ways. So it sounds like, you're you've done the slow and steady, your continuous growth. Can you talk a little bit about like I don't know if this was like easy for you or hard for you, but I know you guys are CLIA and CAP certified. Was that a hard process to get through, or was it just like smooth sailing? Like we're got it figured out.
Well, initially it wasn't easy because you have so few people when you are trying to get that certification. So I remember we actually finished the validation at 2 a.m. before the day that at 9 a.m. the inspector would come.
Oh,
Validation like 2 a.m. at night, the night before. We had to generate, maybe, somewhere between 500 to 1,000 pages of documentation, and we are like 10 people.
yeah.
And we had to do that like within like 3 months while building up the clinical lab, while like hiring and training people, while validating it, and it was a very challenging process. I think everything that we do essentially is like at the beginning it's challenging, and the that those challenges though I think become really great stories later on.
Yeah, absolutely. If you live to tell the tale, then it always makes you stronger. And
Yeah.
so you got certified and accredited. And can you just talk about like the two your guys' product lines in a little bit more detail and kind of how it did you launch both simultaneously? Was it kind of like a sequential?
So, it has always been part of the roadmap and the plan that, we would first go into the, women's health with the prenatal testing, and eventually we will expand into oncology. And the reason is that, prenatal is a large market. It is, $2-3 billion market just with this product, with this test, in terms of total market size in the US. But oncology is 10 times larger. And we realized that we wouldn't have the resources to really tackle the oncology market. And that is why we wanted to also, and it was also the first problem that we were solving. But we went into that prenatal market. That was the first product that we launched. Essentially detecting these recessively inherited conditions directly from maternal blood. We expanded to other conditions to have a full package of all the conditions that are recommended by ACOG, and that business, that prenatal business, is now highly profitable. It is continuing to grow at it is current year, we have done $140 million. We are the second largest prenatal lab in the entire country, fastest growing diagnostics lab in the country. It is growing, 70+% year over year, which is an, truly unprecedented number, because like no company, I think like except for maybe like Apple, Google, like a few like really large companies, like companies do not grow 70 to 100% year over year after reaching 100+ million, revenue rates. At that point, hyper growth is seen as like 30 to 40% growth.
Yeah.
And from last year to this year, we have grown more than 100% year over year. And while being profitable, like that is just, there is normally a rule of 40, kind of like, your profit margin plus your growth rate. If it is 40, it's like, you are golden, you are one of the top companies. we break that formula because, we are growing, close to 100%
Yeah,
while
yeah,
being profitable
yeah.
for the prenatal business. So we are, really excited about, how that business is growing. But again, it was so much work, getting that business to profitability was so much hard work. Every dollar of, insurance payment growth and every dollar of, decreasing the cost of running those tests as we scaled was so difficult. It was like such large projects. And, the team executed, essentially nearly perfectly with, every single thing that they have focused on there. Um, and it is unprecedented. Like no molecular diagnostics business line, has shown
No,
like it.
it's like
So
software.
yeah, right, and our margins are getting to the software levels. Our margin is like 67% right now for our prenatal business, and we are projecting that we can get closer to 75%. So almost like software like
Yeah.
margins, software like gross margins and profit margins. So we are excited about that, and that now allows us to really invest in oncology and use those proceeds as well as the latest raise that we have done to grow our oncology business. And we launched our oncology tests last year. So they are prenatal tests have been around for 5 years. Now we test almost 1 in 10 babies in the United States.
Whoa.
To that. So we are a pretty
Whoa.
large prenatal operation. Uh,
Whoa.
but and it is continuing to grow at a very rapid rate.
Yeah.
But oncology is in the earlier phases, but we see almost faster initial traction in oncology, and we have 2 products there, and we are really excited about how that can really truly transform oncology care. We have already changed even ACOG guidelines on the prenatal
Wow.
side. That happened this year. I mean, there are more guidelines to change there, but our tests are truly becoming standard of care there. On the as I mentioned, these are so impactful conditions to screen for. If you detect an SMA baby during pregnancy, that baby is going to, if they start the Zolgensma within first week of life, that baby is almost going to have the same normal milestones as a normal baby. But with an SMA, if you don't start that treatment, the baby is going to die at age 2 usually. Even if you start it after newborn screening, there is irreversible damage that already happened. So it's truly saving lives, saving babies, and it is making a huge difference. But the difference that we can make in oncology is potentially even larger. So we started with 2 products there. Both of them are pan cancer, so it's for all solid tumors, and both are blood test only. So they only require a blood sample. They don't require an invasive biopsy, and one of them is for therapy selection. So, when you are diagnosed with cancer, the first question that an oncologist asks, okay, what is the mutational profile? Why does this person have cancer? What is the driver mutation? Because there are, numerous therapies that target particular mutations. So, there are 2 ways to handle this. People try to get a tissue sample to try to, analyze that tissue. But a lot of the times the sequencing analysis of that tissue sample can fail, but you're also just taking a part of the tumor, not all of the tumor. So it doesn't actually give you the full picture of that mutational profile. So from a blood sample, because that tissue is shedding DNA to the blood, you can actually, try to find that, full mutational profile by using, liquid biopsies, by using a blood sample. And, we haven't invented this. There are other companies in this space that have, become public, that have become successful. But we have shown that compared to those companies, we are detecting 50% more actionable mutations. That means 50% more possible therapies for these patients that can change the lives, change the therapy trajectories of these stage 3, 4 cancer patients, can truly save lives. But we are also combining it with a therapy response monitoring product, something that an oncologist can use repeatedly to see whether that tumor burden is increasing or decreasing. Today they have to rely on scans, and scans are, so difficult to interpret. A lot of the times they are misleading. You can't do them frequently enough. And we are, seeing in our data that sometimes we can detect changes in the tumor that become apparent in the scan 6 months later. For a stage 4 cancer patient, 6 months is the difference between life or death. We even see patients who actually stop therapies because they don't think that it is working, even though we see that actually, retrospectively, that there was a 90% drop in the tumor burden. So there's so much that we can do on the oncology care, and we are not going to cure cancer by 10% better therapies. But if we can really change and figure out, what is the best therapy for this particular patient, right? Truly personalized cancer therapies, and then follow up and find out, before it metastasizes, before it is too late, that is this therapy working? And then eventually, we are not there yet, but eventually move that to a stage 1, 2 cancer, and then maybe even, asymptomatic patient, early cancer screening. That is how you can get to, I think, as close to curing cancer as possible. So, we are kind of really excited about the duality of our businesses as well, right? If you think about it, prenatal is the beginning of life, and everyone is born at some point, and being able to test for the most severe, most important, most actionable genetic conditions, at the beginning of life is so important. But it is, as important, to also be able to solve one of the most important problems that we face as you get to the, closer to the end of life, which is cancer, which impacts, I think approximately 1 in 2 people who are alive today will get cancer in their lifetime. So, that it really impacts all of us, both of these problems. And I think, we have the technology to be able to really tackle, 2 of the most important problems in healthcare today and really change, standard of care for both of these areas.
That's freaking awesome. That's freaking awesome. And I love how I think about the early discipline of BillionToOne that you kind of like instilled and wove into the DNA of the company is paying dividends now, right? You're like the prenatal business, and having such a high quality product, and making sure that you're doing this as efficiently as possible. And as you get to scale, you're continuing to reap the efficiencies, which then allows you to tackle even like another problem, another subset, and you talked about the, when you were first getting into like Y Combinator, not having the idea of like a flywheel, but this is the flywheel. It's like, as you start getting these scale economies, and I'm not saying every business has the opportunity to drive these kind of these flywheels, because it depends on whatever your business model is. But I love seeing it where you can grow very quickly. Like, profits and growth don't have to be at odds necessarily. They can be synergistic. And also, sometimes I think there's people, when you talk about companies that are profitable, sometimes it's like, oh, but they're not like doing new things. They're just like here to just like, generate profits. It's like, no. Those profits can then get redeployed into other problems and other products that are problems worth solving, and products that you can continue, right? Hearing how you describe the oncology approach is like really exciting for me to hear, because I think exactly you're right. Like, this is not me poo-pooing on therapeutics as like a business model or anything, but like, first and foremost, you need to diagnose. Like, diagnosis is first and is critically important. So I always get fired up when I hear about these new novel ways to do the screen, get it early, so you can have better outcomes and actually apply the therapeutic in the best way possible when you stand a fighting chance, versus, we can have fantastic therapeutics, but if you can't diagnose it properly or early enough, it's kind of moot. So, I love hearing that. And so as you are looking 1 year, 2 years out, what's in store for BillionToOne and what's in store for you?
Well, we think that within a year we are going to become a public company because we think all the right milestones are in place, right? Both of these businesses are actually going to be, strong businesses, each of which actually could go public almost separately, but
Yeah.
they are together. And we have a lot of clinical studies around the response side because we believe that it is really going to be the future, but it is going to take a lot of clinical studies to really establish that as the next generation way of thinking about response monitoring. So as we get to those, clinical study readouts and profitability metrics and the scale of both of those businesses become established, we want to become a public company. We also have been essentially executing on this 20-mile march and setting goals and achieving them for the past 3 years, almost like a public company with that rigor, with that mentality, that I think it is the right time for us. But we see that as an intermediate milestone in many ways. We want to become a generational company. We want to solve some of these largest problems that we can solve. We want to become a category defining company. And for me, the definition of that, the staying power of that is, I think, best summarized with S&P 500. So one thing that we say as a goal is that we want to become the first molecular diagnostics lab to become an S&P 500 company. Because if you're an S&P 500 company, you are not going to go away in 5 years or 10 years. You are going to have staying power because that shows that you have the scale and the profitability, and that you have solved really large, important problems. From the perspective of, and if you mentioned the the scale, the growth and the profitability, I completely agree. Like if you have the right differentiation factors, in many ways, being a very highly profitable company allows you to invest in other areas. And the other thing that you said, the importance of diagnostics. Actually, there was a study that looked at what percentage of healthcare outcomes are due to diagnostics. It is close to 70%. And think about diagnostics. Diagnostics is such a small part of healthcare. You have all the hospital systems, clinics, insurance, you have, therapeutics. I think diagnostics gets maybe less than 5% of healthcare dollars. And it is like close to 70% of the outcomes are attributable to diagnostics. It is such a high leverage, impactful area. And I think we are really going through a change in healthcare where diagnostics is becoming differentiated too. It was always the case that diagnostics is very important in determining healthcare outcomes. But the problem was that I think in the past, a lot of the times diagnostics have become commoditized. Even if one company was doing something important, 5 other companies could do something very similar. And that, created essentially a lot of competition, and it made it difficult for companies to essentially become profitable and then invest that profitability into, new product lines and build really large, impactful companies. But that is changing, especially with cell-free DNA testing and personalized medicine and the problems that we are looking at. These are difficult problems, and you need to have that technology differentiation to be able to solve them. And because these are difficult problems where you can't just build a Me Too product in a year or two, it allows you to essentially reap the benefits of the investments that you have made. And then that allows you to essentially stay innovative and build even more powerful and impactful diagnostics. So I think we are going to see a change where, diagnostics becomes more and more important, not just in terms of determining healthcare outcomes, but in terms of innovation, in terms of how it is changing healthcare. And I think we are also going to see larger and larger companies that can be built on diagnostics. If you think about that, oncology market that we talked about, you can build not just a successful diagnostics company, you can build one of the largest companies in the United States, period, not even healthcare, United States, based on the size of that market and how, you can really make a large impact in oncology care.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like, I have a I guess a soft spot for diagnostics as like an industry because, and I saw it firsthand that like our first client was a subsidiary of Quest, and you can imagine like the amount of like testing that they had to do. So that was like my first foray, and like there was like one of our first like kind of like like for me pivotal experiences in just learning. And one, it's but despite all the like the amazing work that was being done in this lab, it's just like the diagnostics for a long time I felt like didn't get like the spotlight that it deserves, in my opinion. I'm speaking for John now.
It didn't. I think it's certainly true that it didn't, and I think it kind of changed during COVID-19 where people were diagnostics is so important.
Yes, and
then like more recently, a lot of people forget about that experience again.
I know it's so puzzling. It's so puzzling. I'm just like, guys, it's like it's not rocket science that you need to figure out if you're sick before you can treat the sickness. Like that, and I think you're absolutely right. Like during COVID, it's kind of like reminded everyone how mission critical it is for everyone like downstream. But I love to hear your perspective on this because like obviously you're at the forefront of it and you're clearly you're seeing everything kind of the diagnostics industry unfold. So I'm super pumped for BillionToOne. I'm super pumped for you. It's like what a journey, like from all the way from just like having to piece together like $10,000 checks from friends, and it's like, yo, we've got $100,000, like we're like, and then from there snowballing it and just like continuing to keep that discipline and just like having that North Star of discipline and just like thinking about the patients and everyone, making sure everyone that is along for the ride has that alignment is amazing to see. And Oguzhan, you've been frankly so generous with your time, and I can go hours and hours and hours with you. But in a traditional closing fashion for the podcast, we have two questions. The first is, would you like to give any shout outs to anyone who supported you along the way?
Yes, I would like to do so. So this is maybe a little bit of a story as well, but at the time that we were starting BillionToOne, this is right after graduation, and I was able to raise that $300,000, and I was very excited, about it. But being a first generation immigrant, it was also, it was a little bit tricky. And when I talked with my immigration lawyer, he told me that, look, if you stay at Stanford, you have a very good academic career. You are not at danger. We'll get you a green card. It's going to take 2-3 years, but it's going to happen. But if you start the company, I can't guarantee you anything because you are not a well-established entrepreneur. You did raise this $300,000 and you do have like support of Y Combinator, but there is no guarantee that you are going to get a green card and be able to stay in the country. And at that time, because I didn't want to use company's funds much, I had taken out 12 credit cards, all 0% APR, trying to kind of and my spouse has been super supportive during that period as well. Also Stanford Ph.D, also a first generation immigrant, kind of know what it takes to build something and the adversity that we have to go through. But we said, okay, we are going to take that risk, and like right that when that was happening, President Trump was elected, and immigration became a much bigger problem as well. So when I first applied to get my green card, actually I was not accepted, and I was going to get deported essentially from the from the country
Awesome.
if we couldn't resolve it. So I asked my PIs from Stanford and Princeton, Jan Schottheim, Daniel Fisher, Jack Fresco, and they have been just incredible at using their network. And I've received support letters that I submitted to USCIS from like head of National Academy of Sciences, former president, also a student of Jack Fresco from there.
Wow.
I've received support letters from Nobel laureates attesting to the importance of my work and the work that we would be doing at BillionToOne. Like extremely generous with their time, with their support. And we were really only, I think, able to change the decision there because I was able to submit this overwhelming number of support letters that really spoke to the importance of the work that I was doing at BillionToOne. And we wouldn't be here without their unconditional support. They didn't say that oh, you are not in academia. They said that we are going to support you. So I think I want to give a shout out to all those people because their support was incredible. And of course, so to my spouse as well, because not everyone would support you to take 12 credit cards at 0% APR.
Yeah.
Especially, with the risk that we are also taking on the immigration, while, the alternative is to take a, really nice cushy job as a data scientist at Netflix or, or at a hedge fund. Like those are the options that I had that like I didn't take. So, I think that is really, I think, what made all of this possible. So I really want to acknowledge, what they have done for me.
Wow.
Um,
That is what a story. That is crazy. And he was like on a knife's edge, it sounds like. That
yeah,
like truly
it
on a
was.
knife's edge.
It was like, every day I would wake up and I would check the website about, whether this is fully rejected and I'm going to get deported or whether like I can stay in the country, and I have 12 credit cards as well that I have to pay somehow. And again, I think it is, even though it has been, now 7 years, this is a story that I still find emotional to tell because it was like such a difficult time. But
Yeah.
their sport has been just, incredible. And the way that like they described the work was like so incredibly supportive that it wasn't like they would say, like a Nobel laureate would say that this work is more important than my work.
Holy crap. That like one, I'm blown away. But something that I just think about this is like how important it is to like for your support network in all things that you do. Like no one can do it alone. And hearing the kind of this outpouring of support is truly beautiful. And also shouts out your spouse for just like I was on, God damn it. Like, what are we getting into right now? But obviously it worked out. But I love hearing that because I truly think no one can do it alone. And also there's like these moments where that's a major inflection point. We talked about like the road, right? Like when the road splits and getting through it and just like with the support of your colleagues is, I think this is truly a beautiful act. And the last closing question, if you can give any advice to your 21-year-old self, what would it be?
I think it would be kind of keeping an open mind. I think, because I knew that like I would do molecular biology when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
I always had a very much of a, driven personality, and this is the path that I am on. And I think it was, I wouldn't have guessed that I would be, here where I am when I was 21 years old. And I'm glad that I was able to keep an open mind, eventually. But I think it is important to kind of have that mentality as early as possible. And I think I was a little bit lucky. Like all these things that I have done for the sake of knowledge, taking all these like difficult, challenging courses, really broadening my education, ended up really being helpful, but it wasn't planned. If I were 21-year-old, like I would have done those things for those reasons, but also for the reasons that it actually really helps you in life to keep an open mind. And I think, being able to have that open mind was, really important. I think the other thing is, I think what you said, that, that support network is so important, and that, when when you have, you are not alone. Even though the things that you are doing, can be challenging, when you reach out to people, it's, they are amazing at, what they can help you with. And I think, I used to not feel that. Like I used to not think that like I can reach out to someone for help. And it was really kind of an existential crisis that made me, say that, look, I have this really big problem. Can you please help me?
Absolutely. I think for anyone out there listening, it's like, it's okay to ask for help. Like it's totally okay. Because I would do the same. I would just try to like white knuckle it and like grit my teeth and just like get through it. But I probably would have saved myself a lot of pain if I maybe asked for help a little bit earlier on and like swallow that pride, and not think that you have to take it alone. But that's like incredible advice. Every time I ask that question, I'm like, damn, like I truly needed to hear that when I was 21. I truly, every time, like I know probably the listeners out there is like, John, you say that, but like, do you mean it? I'm like, I do mean it. like it would have been incredibly valuable. But Oguzhan, again, I had such a blast. Thank you for taking the time and telling the BillionToOne story and your story as well. You've been super generous, and maybe next time, if you're going to be at JPM, I'm going to assume you're going to be at JPM. We can grab coffee, we can grab a meal, a bite. I'd love to, I'd love to chat some more in real life. But thanks again, and I had a blast.
Thank you for having me. I really had a great time as well. And a lot of these stories, I've told them internally, but I think it is the first time that I'm telling anyone outside of the company.
Thank you. I'm really flattered. Like honestly, I'm really flattered that you were willing to share these stories, and I'm sure the listeners are going to be excited to hear your experience and learn vicariously. So thanks again.
Thank you. Have a good one.
That's all for this episode of the Biotech Startups podcast. We hope you enjoyed part 2 of our conversation with Oguzhan Atay. If you did, consider subscribing, leaving us a review, and sharing it with your friends. Be sure to tune in for our next series featuring Kate Yen, founder and CEO of Oguzhan Therapeutics. Oguzhan Therapeutics is using cutting-edge science to develop next-generation therapies, targeting the dysregulated cell states of cancer. By combining a proprietary database of single-cell genomic data with an AI-powered computational platform, Oguzhan compares healthy cell development to cancer cell development and maps out the drivers of tumorigenesis. Kate has a Ph.D. in biological chemistry from UCLA, where she also completed her postdoctoral fellowship. Before founding Oguzhan, Kate held positions at Merck and UCLA. She also held senior roles at Agios Pharmaceuticals, where she led the IDH translational research team responsible for the preclinical and clinical development of 2 FDA-approved IDH mutant inhibitors. She also co-led the discovery of vorasidenib, a promising glioma therapy currently in clinical development. With Kate's extensive preclinical and clinical expertise, a proven track record of bringing innovative therapies to market, and a passion for tackling complex oncology challenges, her journey and insights are not to be missed. The Biotech Startups podcast is produced by Exceeder. Don't want to miss an episode? Search for the Biotech Startups podcast wherever you get your podcasts and click subscribe. Exceeder provides research labs with equipment leases on founder-friendly terms to support paths to exceptional outcomes. To learn more, visit our website www.exceedr.com. On behalf of the team here at Exceeder, thanks for listening. The Biotech Startups podcast provides general insights into the life science sector through the experiences of its guests. The use of information on this podcast or materials linked from the podcast is at the user's own risk. The views expressed by the participants are their own and are not the views of Exceeder or sponsors. No reference to any product, service, or company in the podcast is an endorsement by Exceeder or its guests.